This is not the first time we've talked about this. This might be the fourth time. We're talking about provider-centric marketing, y'all. Provider-centric marketing. I don't want to say we coined that term,
but it's possible.
But it's possible we coined the term of provider-centric marketing. Basically,
is it catching on though?
I don't. We're the only ones that are saying
we're just so isolated that it's like it's catching on.
Letter to council, please trademark this term.
Yeah. So the conversation of provider-centric marketing is essentially marketing the provider at the front end of the marketing journey. And the whole way through. So instead of a generic one-size-fits-all campaign and strategy surrounding a treatment, maybe one-size-fits-all is a reach, but surrounding a treatment to hone in on marketing to the provider. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about not just the why and where, but also the I guess within the why, some of the pros and cons of provider-centric marketing, and more when is a good time for provider-centric marketing and when is not a good time for provider-centric marketing. So without further ado, again, Andrea to my right, Mitch to my left, two brainiacs and a goober. What did we say last time? It was like two brainiacs and it was a goofball.
I don't know.
So yeah, there you go. But anyway, so let's begin with provider-centric marketing. I gave the definition of provider centricity, but Mitch, do you want to? I'm kind of putting you on the spot right here, but do you want to start with some data? I feel like we've done this before, where you've started with some data of, handsome data that we kind of were looking at. Like, wow, dude, this is incredible.
Yeah. We've shared early data, and I think we're a little bit more conclusive now at this point. What I will say, let's just go macro a little bit. The way that I look at it, I used to look at it that there were two ways to market a practice. One was you can market the business. Those would look like, we've been open 20 years, come see us.
Yeah.
One layer below that would be service. So come, see us. We've been open for 20 years. See us for Botox, right? More specific. And then it opened up even another door when we were kind of doing some of this retention-based goals. Let's see if we can get people to be more committed once they've booked to actually showing up for the appointment. We started experimenting with what we have also coined the accountability workflow. And the thought occurred, well, if the results are so good by just simply introducing a provider's face post-booking, showing them here's who you're going to be booking with. You do a little handshake text saying, here's who I am. Here's some of my work. I'm excited to meet you. Going from a 60% cancellation and no-show rate to a 20% is pretty bonkers. So we thought, well, maybe we should try putting that on the front end of the ad. Why bury the lead? Let's put it right, front and center. So then we developed a third layer, which is you've got a provider doing a service for a practice. The deeper you go in those layers, the more complicated it gets, which then kind of gets us into the cons of provider-centric marketing. But the pros are, if you want to make more money, it's a great
way to do it.
It's a great way to do it.
Well, kind of. Because like anything in marketing, you can look at some statistics and then extrapolate from those few statistics to all.
Yes.
Or it's all a story. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean to make light of any of the previous stats that we have shared and the claims that we have shared, but we also share with the caveat of, we're still watching this. We're still monitoring this. We're still monitoring the results.
Yes.
Like, did that one particular campaign or those couple particular campaigns that did well, were they anomalies? You kind of mentioned this because you start getting into assessing effectiveness of a campaign, and a image at the front end of the ad can make or break the whole thing, right? Like a smiling, attractive face. And I say attractive as just in a good picture, right? Can be an effective ad. Does that have anything to do with the quality of service that particular ad is that's behind that ad?
Yeah, it's a great question. Is not all images are created equal. Not all photographers are created equal. So if you have one batch of provider shots that were done by a photographer that made the photos look very flattering and very photogenic providers, you've got great content. But then you might get another photographer that goes in, maybe they didn't get quite as flattering photos and those might not perform as well. So then you're kind of left with, all right, well, I don't want to let some providers be left out because we're marketing all providers now. So now I'm kind of like stuck, but also these creatives aren't working as good as.
Well, I think that's kind of what we kind of get into. And this is where the rubber meets the road of, okay, now what do we do? When you set up a campaign, you set it up with these rules. In this case, with provider-centric marketing, a rule would be every single provider gets the same treatment offer package. Or I guess you gave three layers deep, right? So when you were talking through how we got there, but yeah, let's just say every provider gets this offer, and we're running those campaigns. Okay. What happens when 2 of them do really, really good and let's say 6 of them aren't doing good? Then what?
Right.
Like how is it just a matter of like, stop investing in those 6 other ones and let's just double down on the ones that are working well? And I think this is where we start getting into the issues of provider-centric marketing is that it's now, yes, we've taken a lot of the decisions out of the unknown and in some ways off of the sales team, right? And now we've just kind of put it all in the campaign. But as you've done that, now we perhaps are missing a good portion of the team when we're investing in money across the board for every provider.
So I want to come right back around to the issue that you raised, but move it up a layer for a moment. This is less of a con and more of a risk that will segue back into the cons column. So if you're going to run provider-centric ads, make sure that you put a lot of love and care into retaining your providers. Because if you're over-indexing on those ads and some of the standout performers are providers who then leave for whatever reason, you can be in a position of struggling to backfill the performance. That doesn't mean don't do the ad. If it's performing well, capitalize on it by all means.
Right.
But you do have to have some risk mitigation measures in place. You do need to be
pay extra attention to the campaigns that you have running at that level, right?
Right. Be optimizing on all fronts so that in the hopefully unlikely event that happens, you aren't pulling that ad down and then struggling to find something to replace it. Make sure that you're well diversified in your ads so that you aren't in a tough spot if you are in a position where you have to pull that down. So make sure that you are doing everything you can to retain your providers. I know everybody knows this, but it bears mentioning and hearing it from marketing people. Take care of your providers, keep them happy. And it's not just the individual provider, but cultivating a culture in your clinic that it just breeds camaraderie and a happy environment where providers want to come in and work. That way there's continuity from the ad that's a smiling face, ideally next to a patient, by the way, but a smiling face that carries through to the real lived experience in the clinic. I think something to keep in mind is revenue, depending on the practice and where their level of maturity, that can be 10 to 20% of revenue represented by new patients, but you have to keep them coming back. So think about what's downstream of that provider ad. And is the patient going to experience that provider in clinic the way that they experience them in that first impression from the ad? I mean, ideally, it's even above and beyond.
Yeah.
So
look, this is really what the conversation of provider-centric marketing is all about. To me, it is about the amount of platform that your provider who ultimately is the one that is doing the service has in the brand that is your brand. Like, how provider facing is your brand? And you also kind of hit on the importance of provider facingness of a brand, period, right? Which is that's the smiling face that's working with me, right? And so no matter what qualities, nature, that brand ethos, that brand is able to convey, it's ultimately conveyed through the lens of your provider. So yeah, this is all about provider support, provider retention, and developing a team atmosphere that provider feels like they are they're not just a part of this thing, that they are this thing.
So let's come back around to the topic you raised about what happens if one or two provider-specific ads are runaway successes and other providers' ads are underperforming.
Yeah.
Because I brought up the importance of culture. The provider ads in and of themselves can be a retention tool. Not the only one, of course, but it is a show of faith that we want to, we're so happy you're here and we're happy to make you a face of our practice brand. We're putting dollars behind paid ads. So in a sense, that can help bolster on the provider retention front. But it's true. What happens when the other providers may not perform as strongly?
Right.
And you have to explain at that point why they aren't getting as much love and attention.
Right.
I think in some cases, if not a lot of cases, much of that's driven by the algorithm. It sounds like a cop-out, but you can see it happen in Facebook or Meta ads rather, where you've allocated budgets. These are, in most cases, just by force of circumstance, these will be running in a common ad set. You allocate your budget. You cannot surgically, no pun intended, surgically allocate the budget across the individual ads. You could break each ad out into its own ad set campaign and try to brute force it, but most practices don't have the budget and resources to support that level of A/B testing. There's not enough budget to force distribution and sample sizes to get a pure read. So you're at the mercy of Meta ads giving each one of these individual ad units per provider fair and equal distribution. It usually doesn't happen. And there's nothing you can do to control it.
I feel Mitch nodding.
Yeah.
So much.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
And that's like the naivety of us, when we started this was, I would say still definitively, if you execute right, provider-centric marketing will almost always outperform service-based marketing. If executed right. So there's a lot of caveats. We talked about the cons, right? Which you got to have those locked in, but they're overcomable. The things that aren't overcomable is if you have 20 providers and you want to market 3 services for each of those providers, think about how many ads that is. Like 60 at minimum if you don't do any split testing on images. And then you have to maintain it. What happens if you lose a provider? Then you have to wipe all those from the face of the planet. You got landing pages, you got automations. So the risk is the more specific you go, the more complex you get, the more challenging it is to set up, the more difficult it is to pull the rug out, but also the better results you get. And so those are for me, when I think of deploying this effectively, it's not as much for like a 20 provider practice. It would probably be more like, 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, it's so cool because you can you get the provider on the front end, you get the provider on the ad, you go to the landing page, that provider is on the landing page, they submit the form, and then you go to the text sequence. You've got front desk staff automations set up. I can't wait for you to meet Susie. Susie is the best. She doesn't pressure her patients into doing anything that they don't want. Like you can talk about that particular, you can vouch for them, which there's psychological statistics on how effective that is, even if there's financial benefit for the provider to be incentivized by the front desk. But it's complex. That's the problem. But it is a huge payoff if you can get it right.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think still that I think we're all really optimistic about these complex problems and how like AI is going to help to
Yeah.
resolve these, and we'll be able to do
We can
so
do
much
it.
more.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about like being able to monitor 50 campaigns at once, 60 campaigns at once at one site. Okay, but like how close are we to like AI being able to monitor like that to the 12th power, right? Like I think the future looks really interesting for that, and that I think that problem could get mitigated, but I don't think that the problem gets mitigated of ad performance and allocation of funds, because there's only so much money that you have in the bucket, and Facebook is in some ways, for marketers, it's on our team to try to get whatever's working to keep on working, and whatever's not working, like Facebook also wants to keep those from like not performing, right? And so this algorithm is not necessarily in the best interest of allocating even support across the board. So I think I love what you said about retention and about the tool of retention that is like provider-centric ads for providers. And I love that in this conversation, it's not a either or, right? That you could have you could have well, I'm sorry I'm saying you can have this, Mitch, because you're just basically saying like, dude, that's so many campaigns right now. But in a perfect world, that you can have ads that are running for every provider, and then certain ads are performing better, right? And then like I do think that there is a natural, it's in the best interest of not just us, not just Facebook, but also of the practice, that the ones that are performing better, that you fan that flame.
So
The rising tide raises all boats, right, Andrea?
It does. And I have two responses to some things that you said. I think AI is already there, but it's only going to be useful if you're able to feed it a complete data set. And that's where most people are struggling today, is getting the full feedback loop and being able to deliver to an AI model what it needs to make those intelligent decisions. There may be a human touch involved in the actual orchestration, but I think in terms of analytics, the capabilities exist, but it's just getting a complete data set to fully inform the view and get the actual intended outcomes. On the provider-centric ads that are underperforming, I think one of the best compromises would be to pull the ads that are underperforming, but the compromise would be on the service ads that are performing well, you can have a landing page experience that then introduces those providers. You can allocate the exposure that different providers get if you had taken their ads out of rotation. Right. You can use the landing page as another method of driving conversions towards those providers that doesn't inflate your cost per lead on the front end of that.
Right. And it's also the accountability workflow, right? That like that the whole impetus of this idea was an accountability workflow that was personalizing that patient journey and helping to retain leads post capture.
Yeah, and just because you lean into provider-centric, first off, there's a political aspect to this too, right? Because if I'm a provider and for some reason I was deemed unworthy by the Facebook algorithm to have my ad surfaced, I would be a little bit upset about that. But
yeah.
So there's the fact that my face isn't on there, but then there's the root problem, which is, am I still getting an equal amount of patients on my calendar? The way that we've overcome that is having a provider agnostic ad that still feeds those providers that for whatever reason aren't the ones that are showing,
whose ads are underperforming.
Yeah, but it's also, I think, an expectation setting exercise to, hey, we're going to do this, but we can't guarantee that, everybody's is going to take off, but we will try hard and we'll, attempt to multiple different creatives, you be willing to be shot by, a photographer and, keep letting us use these, and then we'll find one that works most of the time. There's been just a handful of times where we haven't been able to get it work to work better than the provider agnostic ones. Only a handful of times, but in those situations you do have to have a fallback.
I think the challenges I love, I think the word political, I think is the right word here.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is a certain level of sensitivity that we all need to remind ourselves in marketing, that these are not just real people, real patients, but these are also real people, real providers,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we're trying our best to humanize what is an otherwise completely digital, screen-based experience that is just meant to get a really good handoff, a really good handshake, and so that when that actual experience takes place in person, man, we're good to go. And the least amount of friction, the best. And so I think the idea of like of being careful and honoring the person, honoring the provider. I think there's a lot of different ways that you could do it. Andrea, you kind of mentioned that. But I also think that it speaks to the way operations, the way teams, sales teams, everybody, we're all in this together. There's a huge crew that is replacing the tires at the pit stop. And maybe that's a bad metaphor here, but there's a huge crew that is behind a provider. I mean, even for our leanest of partners, like they would say that too. You can't go it alone. A provider cannot wear every single hat. And so I think making sure that we're also recognizing and supporting rebooking rates through this whole experience justifies all of the ad spend as well. Like, how are we supporting from an operational standpoint? What happens after that patient comes in the door, right? Because making good on the whole patient journey is what we're really aiming to do. And sometimes a picture on the front end, we keep on coming back to this. I think it's the most accessible or easiest to understand. A picture that is underperforming and therefore an ad is underperforming does not necessarily mean that that we should kill that provider-centric campaign, especially for that provider is a damn good provider who's really, really good at retention. Like if we knew that provider was really, really good at retention, wouldn't we overcome, like just keep on pushing? Let's find different ways to get there. And so, yeah, again, in an incubator where we're just kind of looking at things from a dashboard and like, oh, this is performing, this isn't performing, do this, don't do this. Sometimes it feels like we lose the humanity of all of it. But when we start looking at the humanity and looking at it from a whole team picture, I think that there's other color that gets lost.
So one of the other means that we haven't discussed in trying to remediate where certain providers' ads may be underperforming, start feeding more content around that provider into your organic cadence and see which posts or stories or reels hit.
Good point.
And you can use that to potentially become a paid ad or at least inspire paid ad content that's likely to perform better.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be a one and done.
Yeah.
Oh, this failed the test.
Yeah.
We're moving on from paid ads for this given provider.
Yeah.
Right.
You can continue exploring on the organic front
It's a great call out.
and use that to ideate on the paid ad side.
And then when assessing it, what I would recommend is don't measure it necessarily by views and likes, view it by saves. If you get if you get any type of saved content, the more that means that they saw it as valuable. And so that typically is a little bit more of a conversion signal than necessarily like,
straight.
This was a nice video
traditional
that
engagements.
People liked. Yeah.
Love.
You raise a really good point. Before we move on, the point you made about retention rates on the back end and the provider skill talent, if they're an amazing provider, this is reliant upon having a data ecosystem and reporting environment
where you can see all of it. Yeah,
exactly. So that's something to definitely be working on in parallel with your ads optimization, is making sure that your reporting is as strong as possible and allows for these types of drill down analyses or looking at longer revenue curves on the patients who are associated to these particular providers and the specific ads that drove that visit.
Yeah. I think the conversation of what level of exposure, what level of presence the provider should have with my brand, I think is a really interesting conversation. And I've always, I feel like we have always been very adamant about platform them as much as possible. Like, what that does mean is it puts pressure on the management team and everybody to like, no, we are great, like together, and we're worthy of a provider, like building a place of a provider that wants to stay. Where they don't just want to stay because there's ads that are running of them for this business. They want to stay because they're a part of this family, and because there's support for retention, there's support for building my book of business. There's all of these things, but the provider-centric marketing definitely puts more pressure on the team to come together, to rally, to build an ethos, and make it a place that's all that and a bag of Doritos for providers to be.
So I think it's worth exploring further on the creative front. We've hit on it a couple times, like you were flirting with going deeper on the topic, and I would encourage us to do that. On the creative side, you called out that we keep talking about pictures.
Yeah.
I think we should talk about videos. I think we should talk about the format, including patients versus not. And I think we should talk about high production value videos versus more
UGC.
raw.
Yeah.
Yeah, more raw UGC style.
Yeah. So I can speak from a brand standpoint. Every single one of our rebrands that we do, every single website that we build, we start with the provider CMS, the provider content management system, which basically that means that we start through the lens of how can we build a portfolio for the provider that they can, that all of their before and afters go, that all of their reviews go, and that has their treatments. And so imagine that like they could easily be able to refer or hand that off during a consultation or in social media, whatever, organically, what have you. I also, when thinking specifically about the creative that we capture at that juncture, it is headshot. Like you said, it's also treatment with patient. and we've gotten really specific because we've run so many ads on like what the framing is like, right? That for injectables, for instance, we want to make sure that we can see both faces, both smiling, but we've got to hide a needle because those needles aren't, Meta doesn't like, or Google doesn't, whoever doesn't like those needles. So you have to kind of be creative with that. But we've got a very specific photography list. I think on the UGC side, Mitch, you can speak to that because I think we've had different campaigns or different strategies to get people to send in their stuff. And, it's interesting talking about all of this also within the framework of like the hero being the patient, because this is all very provider-centric. But yeah, on the video side, we've definitely experimented with full provider videos and their bios and where that could go. It's pretty crazy.
I just had like a really dumb thought because it's already really complicated, but what the heck?
Why not? Yeah.
UGC content talking about their experience with a provider that then goes to provider-centric landing page.
Yeah.
That would be
nuts.
That would be next level. But the reason why I say that is we've used patient experience UGC. That's what I've seen do the best is, hey, I'm, just about to walk into Antares Aesthetics, and then they walk in and then they go and they get their treatment. I'm going to go see Susie. And then they kind of talk a little bit about it on the way and kind of voice over on it. Those do great. Even just quick videos, laser getting shot kind of as they go. That's another great content that I've seen. On the image front, yeah, you've talked about shot lists and angles. Like if you can get the patient and the provider to show as much personality as possible, those perform the best. Yeah. Like photogenic, lighting, those things are important. But if you get a smile where they look like they're enjoying their time together at a glance, you're like,
well, because that's the magic. Like the magic of a provider and a patient's real relationship that's kind of built over the time of that patient feeling more and more like themselves, more and more confident, all the things because of the provider. Like, if that could be bottled up in an ad and like somehow delivered, of course that's going to perform well, right? So I do, yeah, I totally agree. The most potent ads are the ones that show personality and connection on both sides.
What's interesting is one of our top performing ads was actually not even
a
hero
treatment.
shot. It was provider and patient, and the provider looked like they said something so funny, or the patient looked like they said something so funny, but the provider was like doubling over laughing. And then the patient was also standing and laughing as well.
The only way that you could tell that it was a provider and a patient
is the scrubs.
Was the scrubs on the provider, and the provider's face was angled at the patient, and the patient was looking forward. So it in a lot of ways, it didn't have hardly any information, but the information that it all had was the most necessary information. Who is the person that I'm identifying with? The one that's looking at me, that's smiling and laughing. And why are they smiling and laughing? It's because this provider that's like got this great connection. Like, it had all of the DNA there. So yeah, I think, Andrea, going back to your question on like what's the stuff that goes into this? Yeah, we've kind of gotten a list of things that have worked, and there's nuance, right? Like, we've tried some ads that are similarly and they haven't worked as well. But in terms of how we corral provider-centric marketing and how we support every provider, it's a team-based activity, and I it's my mission that everybody gets honored. That doesn't mean that everybody has a picture that is a performing ad, within the whole team, but that everybody's presence is, it takes a village, man, and everybody needs to get honored.